seasons. Keep it interesting for you folks. So look for my face. Different background. Okay. Let's get started. My grandma was a force of nature, and I loved her. When my grandma died, the relatives locked up the house and it remained untouched for 10 years. Hey, we're Italian and we don't let go easily. Except for bi-weekly cleanings, of course. I eventually bought the house and started clearing things out because everything was exactly how it was the day she died. The first night we were in the house, it was hot as Hades, but my kids, teenagers, tried on Grandma's fancy robe, jewelry, and wiglets. They rooted through her dressers and trunks. It was all fun and games, until it wasn't. In the middle of the night, my 19-year-old daughter came running into our bedroom crying and yelling about a woman standing at the end of her bed. It seems it got very cold in her room and she sat up to pull up the quilt. A woman was standing at the end of her bed, staring. The beds were original to the house. We laughed and kind of poo-pooed her, but she refused to return to that room, so she stayed in our bed that night and many nights to follow. I did tell her that we were sleeping in the bed where my grandfather died, and she vowed never again to return. On the second night in the house, my husband woke up and asked who was in the hallway. Thinking it was one of the other kids, he got up to look around but saw no one. It was one of the girls in the robes heading for the bathroom. Except it wasn't. My husband, the nuclear scientist, decided it was just headlights passing by. My beloved voice of reason. A few weeks passed, and all was quiet, except for the middle of the night smell of brewing coffee and burnt toast. Grandpa's favorite breakfast. My daughter went next door to the cousin's house to let out the dog and returned with a picture of a family reunion. She pointed out my grandmother and said, "This is the lady standing at the end of my bed." She had never met her great-grandmother. I went down to the basement and chatted with Grandma, telling her that while I loved her presence there, she was scaring the kids. I told her that I loved her. I would take care of the house that she and my grandfather built, and that it was okay for her to move on. Been quiet ever since. I love that. She's just looking after her house and her grandkids. Super cool. Next. The next few stories are actually not from Reddit. They're from a podcast called Monsters Among Us that accepts true scary stories, real paranormal experiences that have happened to people. So, just wanted to let you know. Okay. When Marty was a child back in the 90s, she tells Monsters Among Us that she was a fan of ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his dummy sidekick, Charlie McCarthy. She says that when her father came across a ventriloquist doll as he wandered through a small magic shop located outside of Santa Rosa, California, he decided to buy it for her birthday. While ringing up the sale, Marty says the cashier gave her father weird vibes and said to him, "You know, when you put your hand inside the doll, he's going to come alive." Laughing off the comment, he brought the dummy home to his daughter. According to Marty, She was over the moon when Dad gave her the doll, saying, "I was so happy when I got that doll. I was obsessed." But before long, strange things began happening. Though impossible because the doll's head was made of hard plastic, she says its expressions would change, including his smile. Worried something would happen to her precious dummy, Marty's family shut it away in a cupboard most nights. One night, she and her family were awakened by the pitter-patter of steps in their living room. Thinking it was the dog or another family member, they went to look. No one was there, except for the doll, sitting on the couch. We remember specifically, we always put it away because I loved that doll so much that I took care of it, Marty says in the podcast. Other strange occurrences began happening. While Marty and her dad were away, her uncle was alone in the house. The uncle says he heard Marty's father calling his name from the living room even though he wasn't home. And when he went to look, he found the doll, once again, sitting on the couch, and no one else. All of our family was pretty much scared of the doll, Marty says. People would start hearing their names being called, and we would hear walking at night, so we just decided that we needed to get rid of it. Being Mexican and religious, Marty says her parents wanted to burn the doll in case it was demonic. They put it on the grill, and according to Marty, it wouldn't burn. This doll would not go up in flames at all whatsoever. They tried cutting it up with a knife, but were unsuccessful. Finally, they threw it in the trash can. After the garbage was collected, Marty's dad went to retrieve the bin. In it, the doll. To rid themselves of the dummy, they dug a hole in the backyard and filled it with cement. Marty and the family have long since moved away, but she says they still think about the doll and the possibility that eventually it finds one of us. That is super creepy. Ew. That's really icky. Get that thing out of there. Buried in the backyard. Jesus. Okay. Next. Jeff, a resident of Dayton, Ohio, was driving with his 3-year-old son, Miles, in the back seat when they passed by a modest cemetery decorated with only flowers and small plaques. It basically looked like a giant garden, Jeff explains on the podcast, Monsters Among Us. According to Jeff, as they drove by, his toddler, who had been happily singing, abruptly stopped, pointed to the cemetery, and exclaimed, "Look at all those people!" Jeff turned to look, but didn't see a soul. Confused, he asked Miles what he was talking about. "All of those people over there, there sure are a lot of grandmas." As Jeff tells it, chills ran down his spine as he asked his son what the people were doing. "They're all standing there, looking down at the grass," Miles said. Completely unsettled by the conversation, Jeff sped up and drove home. Later the same day, he says his young son was watching TV when he turned to Jeff and said, "You know, they weren't alive." Thinking Miles was referring to the cartoon, Jeff asked what he meant. my kid has a sixth sense, Jeff says, or if he just has a wild imagination. Kids are sensitive to things like that. They see things we don't. It's consistent in so many stories that kids can see things that we cannot and feel things that we cannot. Spooky. Spooky, spooky, spooky. My sister used to live in a 1,000-year-old house in England. I honestly thought she was losing her mind when she kept telling me about her ghost that would take her items and move things around. One day I was visiting and she said, "It's here." Me and her 2 teenage daughters went to the foot of the stairs, and on the landing was a ball of fractal-looking light about the size of a soccer ball. It slowly glided down the stairs past us. My dog had all her hackles up and was clearly tracking it, and I felt something like a light brush of wind as it went past us into the living room and disappeared. I grabbed some pens and paper and asked everyone to stop speaking and write down what they had just witnessed. We all saw the same thing. I never doubted my sister again. Still have no idea what it was, though, and I've never experienced anything like that again. Super cool. Super cool. Giant orb. So, something really strange and unsettling happened to me recently, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Here's what went down. It was my friend's birthday, and we all got pretty drunk. Nothing out of the ordinary for a party night. The next evening, we drank heavily again. I live with 2 of my friends, but they had to leave early the next morning to travel to another city for work. They weren't going to be back until late at night. So that morning, I woke up earlier than usual, probably because I was still jet-lagged from traveling a few days prior. I noticed my friends were gone, and I had an assignment to work on, so I dragged myself to the living room and started working. But I was incredibly hungover and couldn't focus. It was cold, and there was some sunlight streaming in, so I decided to lay down on the carpet to warm up and maybe take a nap. That's when things got weird. I was laying there, staring at the door in the corridor. I didn't see anyone, but I could hear the floor creaking repeatedly. It was subtle at first, but then I realized I couldn't move. I felt like I was trapped between being awake and asleep. Then I saw my mom. She walked into the room and started cooking in the kitchen while talking to me, but here's the thing. I live abroad. There's no way she was actually there. That's when I felt a heavy, oppressive presence in the room. Suddenly, voices filled my head that were terrifying. They kept telling me to end my life, saying there was nothing left for me to do and no other options. I was arguing with them in my mind, trying to resist, but they were relentless. I wanted to call someone for help, so I grabbed my phone, which was next to me. My first thought was to message my mom, telling her something was seriously wrong. But just as I was about to send the message, my phone disappeared from my hand. stared at my empty hand, confused. Then I saw my phone still lying behind me. I had never actually picked it up. This happened multiple times. I think I was reaching for help, only to realize it wasn't real. Then it escalated. The voices became louder, telling me it was time to jump off the balcony. I live on the 7th floor, and I saw the balcony doors opening on their own. It was like something or someone was trying to lead me there. At that moment, I felt something grab my legs and start dragging me toward the balcony. That's when I finally snapped out of it. I don't know how, but I managed to break free from whatever was happening. When I looked around, it was evening. Hours had passed. The light in the apartment had dimmed and my heart was racing. I was terrified. I ran to my room, quickly got dressed, and left the house. I walked to a nearby cafe, got a coffee, and just stayed outside for as long as I could. That was easily the scariest and most surreal experience of my life. I don't know if it was sleep paralysis, a hallucination, or something else entirely, but I have never felt that kind of fear before. That sounds absolutely demonic. And like sleep paralysis, yes. That's horrific. And I'm so glad you didn't do anything terrible to yourself. That's spooky. Not once, but twice, I've experienced something that etched itself in my memory, leaving behind an uneasy feeling that hasn't let go. It wasn't just a random oddity, but two separate occasions, months apart, that chilled me to the bone. The first time, I was walking on an ordinary afternoon. Out of the blue, my eyes drifted toward a passing car beside me. There, sitting in the front seat, was a middle-aged man. His head had fully swiveled in my direction almost unnaturally, and his eyes were locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. His mouth was stretched into a big, eerie smile that kind of seemed to conceal a private joke or something even darker. I looked away, trying to shrug off the tension, but the chill lingered at the back of my neck. Months passed, and the encounter faded into a weird, unsettling memory that I tried to brush aside, until it happened again. Another day, another drive, a completely different part of town. My mind was elsewhere when another car stopped at the red light. It was waiting at the bus stop with friends, and he was the only car on the road at night. I glanced over, and there he was. Well, not the same man, but a similar one, middle-aged, smiling too broadly, his head twisted to keep his unblinking stare fixed on me. My stomach knotted with a sudden, suffocating anxiety. I forced myself to keep my gaze forward, pretending it didn't rattle me, but my pulse hammered in my ears. It hasn't happened since, but the memory lingers. The strangest part is how it occurred twice. Two different men, two separate instances, but the same unsettling smile. Has anyone else experienced something this bizarre? I don't know why, but it really bothered me. Then in supervisor that piped in saying, yeah, happened to me too. I want to read that to you, okay? I've had similar but different encounters. Once was at McDonald's. I was in the drive-thru and a customer was inside at the counter. She turned her head and stared me down through the open drive-thru window hard. I broke the gaze, but when I looked back, she hadn't budged, still staring through me. I felt the real evil and hatred for me. That episode has bothered me ever since. The second time was in a large crowd at a fair, maybe. As I was scanning the crowd area, a man deep in the crowd was staring at me with such evil and hatred and darkness. His face was almost snarling. Pure hatred. Both incidents really unnerved me, and they still do years later. I'm a very spiritual person, and the only thing I can think of is that a higher power was keeping that evil away from me. I don't know how, but I felt like they were being restrained from getting to me and hated me for it. It was the most unsettling, unnerving feeling I've ever had. Wow, that's really completely unsettling. That's awful. I have to think that perhaps they are some sort of a demonic presence radiating that kind of hatred and evil, especially for somebody who is religious, as you say. It's a crazy world we live in. I'll never forget this experience from my early days as a pediatric nurse, working in one of the oldest wings of the hospital. During the night shift, I witnessed something that still puzzles me to this day. Children, who are generally extraordinarily perceptive, began noticing an unexplained presence precisely around 6 in the morning. Several of them, unprompted and with striking consistency, asked about the doctor who had just visited. They described him as a tall figure with gray hair, glasses, and always wearing a white coat. Eventually, I had to ask my colleagues about this mysterious man. "Oh, yeah, that sounds like Dr. So-and-so," they say nonchalantly. "He used to work here, but he passed away some time ago. We believe he still makes his rounds, checking on the children." I had never seen any pictures of this doctor, yet every child recounted the same image. It was an eerie realization that perhaps those we've lost continue to watch over their charges, existing in a space between our reality and theirs. It's sort of sweet. It clearly was a man that loved his job and wasn't ready to give it up yet. Kinda neat. Okay, here's a glitch in the Matrix. Alright. This happened about 2 months ago, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. After stumbling across these glitch in the Matrix videos that keep coming up on YouTube, I thought I'd share it with you all. I've got no explanation. Maybe one of you does. I work a pretty boring 9-to-5 job in a mid-sized office building. Every day, I go to the same coffee shop across the street around 2 p.m. he sees me in the line. On this particular day, I left my office a little later than usual, around 2:15. When I reached the door in the lobby, I realized I'd left my key card on my desk on the other side of the building. But that was no problem. The secretary, Sarah, signed me out on paper. This happens all the time. As I crossed the street and approached the coffee shop, I saw myself. Me, wearing the same clothes, same bag, same everything, standing at the counter inside, chatting with Sam. I froze. My heart was racing, but my brain was like, no, you're just imagining this. Maybe it's just someone that looks like you. But then this other me turned slightly, and I got a perfect look at their face. It was me, down to the tiny birthmark I have under one eye. I panicked. I turned around and walked back across the street without going inside. My hands were shaking. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that I must have been overtired or something. But here's the thing. When I got back to my desk and looked in my bag, the coffee cup was there. The exact same coffee I was planning to order, with my name written on it in Sam's handwriting. I never went to the shop. I never bought the coffee, but there it was. Hot and fresh, like I just picked it up. I looked at the clock, and the time was still 2:15. The usual time I'd get back after heading over and grabbing my coffee. But I'd definitely been outside for longer than a minute. It was like my timeline diverged. One version of me had split away at 2 p.m. and gone to grab the coffee, while I stayed behind. And then when returning to the building, our timelines had merged again. It got me wondering about the stories of shapeshifters or doppelgangers I'd heard in the past, and I had to wonder if this is where some of those came from. Maybe two timelines split or converge, and you can be at two places at once for a short time. I wonder how many times this sort of thing happens without you noticing. I haven't told anyone at work because, let's be real, they think I'm insane. But the secretary at the office does remember me heading out, and she remembers me having forgotten my key card. But she says it happened at 2. And it even says so on the log where she signed me out. I've gone back to the coffee shop since, and everything's been normal, though weirdly enough, Sam didn't remember me coming that day. The next day, when I went to grab my coffee, he asked if I'd been off sick the day before. So, if he never gave me a coffee that day, where did the coffee in my bag come from? Some parallel universe that collided with this one for a split second? How can him and Sarah remember things so differently? Which one of these is even real? I don't know, but I still have the cup. I wrote on it in red marker, "This came from nowhere." It's in my kitchen cupboard now. I keep checking on it just to remind myself that I didn't imagine the whole thing. But what the hell happened? Any ideas? Yeah, I think you are onto something there. That sounds like a weird time slip. Super glitchy. very irritable. I was packing for a trip. My incontinent senior dog had a habit of wriggling out of her diaper in the most inconspicuous corners of the house. I swear she did it on purpose for a few moments of freedom. However, she leaked like a dripping faucet, so when I saw her bare bottom prancing in front of me while I was putting my accessories back together, I lost my shit. Like full-blown, raging pregnancy hormones, seeing stars, lost it. And the only way to handle it clearly was to throw something. LOL. I threw my favorite necklace toward the corner of the wall, hitting near the ceiling. I watched it make contact against the drywall, but then it disappeared. Just gone. I searched the entire bedroom, thinking that maybe it bounced and landed somewhere crazy, like on top of the ceiling fan blade. I even checked the trim above the closet door and the baseboards to see if it fell through a gap. In my desperation, I even prayed to Saint Anthony like my grandma always taught me. However, I had to catch a flight, so I took the L and told myself that I deserved it because I was a complete and utter lunatic. Years later, I was cleaning out my purses and found the necklace in the inner pocket of a purse. I had not used this purse in years. It was a winter dark leather bag that I wouldn't have packed for a summer trip. My husband wasn't home at the time I was packing, and he wouldn't have touched it or put it in a purse. The purse was tucked away at the back of my closet on the top shelf for years. I know I was a hormonal raging mess, but I literally saw the necklace hit the wall and never come down, only for it to show up again later in an inner pocket of an otherwise empty purse. Well, I feel you, girl, because I had something pretty similar happen. I'm not going to share it now, but I'll tell you what, if I get to 100 subscribers, I'm going to share all of my own personal paranormal experiences. I got a few.